Hi, my name is Jean, and I researched the nationalistic nature of South Korean opposition to the LGBT. I'm currently a sophomore in the college, majoring in theology with concentration in ethics and minoring in Korean. This was a paper written for the class Gender and Sexuality in Korean Culture with Professor Choi. So a little bit about the paper itself. I found that South Korean opposition to the LGBT comes in three main forms: family culture, the military, and Christian lobbies. However, all of these ultimately stem from a nationalistic mindset that sees the LGBT as a Western import rather than a human rights concern. For instance, family culture in Korea is largely based on Confucianism, which is very hierarchical and patriarchal and heteronormative. There's an expectation that people procreate as the family is the fundamental unit of society. Wives are supposed to listen to their husbands, stuff like that, which often leads to those who don't identify as part of that rigid structure to be alienated by their families. Oftentimes it leads to difficulties with the law because Korean identification system is also based on family. Therefore, if one's family does not accept one's identity as an LGBTQ person, then it often leads to difficulty in legally being recognized as even a person at all. In the military, there is a strong sense of like masculinity and a very also heteronormative sense. The Korean military has a lot of cultural power in the minds of the Korean people because all males are required to serve in the military for a certain period of time, and also because the threat of war with North Korea still looms large, as the Korean War ended in an armistice rather than a formal end. So any threat against the Korean military or the Korean military culture is seen as a threat to Korean society as a whole. Therefore, those who identify as part of the LGBT community who are in the military are often ridiculed and can often be persecuted legally for their identity because it's seen as a threat to the masculine military culture, which is then a threat to the military and then a threat to security of Korea overall. Finally, the Korean Christian lobbies have a lot of power politically within Korea. They're largely based on the fundamental Bible Belt evangelistic Protestantism we find here in America as well. And it kind of sees the fact that gay rights is definitely more protected in America and that gay marriage is legal. Christian lobbies in Korea see that as a downfall of the Western church and kind of sees it the Korean church's responsibility in order to uphold the Christian values. Therefore, the Korean Christian church has this sort of nationalistic motivation to keep their identity as this pure Christian community, which is why they fervently oppose the LGBT, which they see as threatening not only their Christian identity, but their Korean identity as well. So since the subject is so strongly opposed in Korea, there's a lot of very limited scholarship on the topic, and it made it really difficult for me to find materials in the databases I usually looked at. So I found the Journal of Homosexuality, which had a couple articles about South Korea specifically. I relied a lot on current event articles and also observations that I made based on descriptions of Korean history and particularly Confucian family hierarchy. And as a reflection, I'm Korean American, so I was really curious about why the LGBT was seen as a Western conception. As a Korean in the West, I was really curious about this intersection, and I want to write this paper based on that curiosity. And I've concluded that the LGBT are greatly oppressed in Korea and have a dual challenge that I'd say is unique to the LGBT community in Korea, as that they have to be not only accepted by this heteronormative, patriarchal, cisgender society, but they also have to prove that they're still Korean regardless of their sexuality, which makes it really difficult for them because they're being opposed on all these different fronts and encountering difficulties from various different angles. I also found that because Korea has been greatly impacted by the West after and during the Korean War, it seems that there is a certain level of pent-up frustration about this. and the desire to somehow cling to their Korean identity regardless. And this manifests in the oppression of the LGBT.